I moved to town in '97, and I went out to the Wilson County Fiddle Contest, and I met Fraser Moss, and he was they called him the Dean of the Tennessee Fiddlers, and he was like 88 at the time. But I met him there, and we hit it off like immediately, and so he's the first guy that brought me over to John's house. And he also brought me to a book signing. Charles Wolfe had written a book called The Devil's Box, and so he brought Fraser out to kind of be, to help, play and everything. And John was in the band, and Mark Howard, and so Fraser asked me to come and sit in, and so I played a couple tunes, and that happened first, and then he brought me over to John's and to his house there up on the river, and so we just jammed and hung out, and so I got acquainted with John through Fraser, and at the time John was working on a book about Ed Haley, the old-time fiddler, and he was obsessed. I mean, that's the way John was. I mean, it was either totally on or totally off. I mean, he was completely obsessed with whatever he was into, and Ed was the guy for him. So I started doing some transcriptions for his book of Ed Haley's fiddle, and I'd write it out, and when I'd finished with 2 or 3 transcriptions, I'd come over to the house, and he'd sit at the long end of his dining room table there on the river, and he'd go back and get Ed Haley's fiddle that he had, and then I'd sit there and play through the tunes on Haley's fiddle, and so he just kind of absorbed that, and so that's how I first started working with him, was helping him with his book. I wasn't a longtime fan of his, but like once he was on my radar prior to this, I was just like, wow, the Wild Hog and the Red Brush record I loved, and, Squirrel Hunters and all that, and so he was definitely turned into like a main idol, like mentor, friend. I ended up moving 4 houses up the river from him. Just another dumb luck thing, I looked in the classified ads in the paper. That's how long ago that was. And rented this house. And so I'd go up to John's, every day, go up there and eat, hang out and play fiddles and listen to records and, hang out in his office. And I was also running buddies with John's guitar player, Chris Sharp, who was in the string band. So he and I were hanging out. And so I just got into this orbit, and like, John's orbit was wild, the people that come around. So it's like through John, I got to become close friends with Benny Martin and just lots of jam sessions with lots of people that I wouldn't, as a youngster, I couldn't really get in those rooms yet. But like with John, it's like it's like kind of the golden ticket to hang out. He'd take me to Scruggs' house, and, I'd drive him around in the Cadillac. We'd go to fiddle contests. Like we did a band contest out in around Dixon, I think. Like me and John and Chris, we entered the band contest, and we got second. Yeah, we didn't win. What are you going to do?
You have to keep practicing.
Yeah, I know, yeah. That's the way John was, man. He just absolutely torn up about the fiddle. I mean, just totally obsessed. I mean, all the time. So, and I was too, and so he and I became good buddies like that. Well, it was one of Scruggs' parties. He lived up here in Madison on Donna Drive for so many years. And then in, I guess, the late 90s, I don't know, ish, he moved down to Franklin Road into George and Tammy's old house. This, really modern, like beautiful white house with like white carpets. Actually, we helped him move some stuff. Me and Chris and a couple of other young guys helped him move some stuff from his basement in Madison. And so, we were carrying these boxes of Scruggs instructional books and records and stuff. And he ended up giving us like some things. And but yeah, John took us over there, to these like, high powered parties. It was just like, so I mean, just to be in his presence was like awe-inspiring, and it's funny the way I had a chance to talk to him, with there were not very many people around, and he's like, well, I came to town with Lost John. I started playing, and I was like, and then I got a job with Bill Monroe, and I was like, oh, you don't say. How'd that turn out? Yeah. It's like, oh, yeah. I heard about that, I think. But I mean, he was a very interesting person. I mean, kind of an enigma, kind of an awe-inspiring cat. But, just to orbit around these first-gen dudes, because, I mean, at the time it was like, Uncle Josh, I was buddies with him, and, I'd take him up to Kentucky to buy lottery tickets. He'd want to go up there, and, I played in his band here and there, him and Kenny, and played some mandolin. And so I kind of got in just like right at the last sweet spot of being around these old timers, first gen dudes. And
when you moved here, that had to be everything that you'd hoped for. And then here it is.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And thankfully I had the wherewithal to know it's just like I have to get around these old guys and like learn from these masters. And so, I mean, I was just like, where are they? It's just like I just wanted to be around it and learn from them and just, get the vibe and get the stories and, obviously the music. And, one of the most memorable things he ever said to me is like musical advice was, it was a short little phrase, but he was talking about kind of getting your sound together. He's like, well, once you get your projector up and running, you got to show them something they've never seen before. So that one's always stuck with me big time.
That's pretty damn good.
Yeah, right? Yeah, I mean, I had a little band going, and that was his advice. But, I mean, he had so many devices for creativity, and he was always, kind of pushing me to, be more creative, do more stuff. He's like, write 10 fiddle tunes in a day. Look at somebody else's CD and take the title and then write a tune of what you think that title means. Just these weird kind of, and then he told me about his songwriting thing called the woodpile, where he'd have little phrases, little bits, and he just collected all these little phrases that he'd liked that maybe didn't make it into a song, but he had a woodpile of phrases that he would draw from. Yeah.
Did he have them in a notebook or?
Yeah. He was, he called himself a frustrated librarian. So it's like he had card catalogs, and I mean, everything was, he would write down everything. He learned how to write music in the 80s. So he had, of course, beautiful script. I'll show you. I've got some of his big transcriptions. I'll show you. They're really beautiful. But he's like, well, if you're looking for this tune, it says up there, B 42. So that means it's in, book B, page 42. And then you go in here to this card catalog, pull it out, and then you go into here and you pull, okay, then you find it. And here it is. So he showed me how to find everything, which actually came in handy because after he passed, I went through all of his journals and we wrote a book, putting out all of his unreleased fiddle tunes, that he'd collected in these journals. So it's like, I think to some extent, he kind of maybe showed me that on purpose, knowing maybe that something like that would happen. We spent a lot of time together in that office, so, maybe he had some inkling of that. I don't know. But, I mean, it worked out that way.
Did he still like being on the road at that point?
He loved being on the road. I mean, he really did. I mean, he was an attention hound. I mean, straight up. It's like he loved having all the eyes on him, and that's the mark of an entertainer. You got to have that to be, a successful entertainer. So, he really did enjoy it. I mean, he was such a gifted, natural showman. I mean, who can stand up by himself? He had the string band, obviously, when I was with him, but I mean, by himself and hold a huge crowd, just standing up with a fiddle. It's just like, what kind of magnetism does that require? Yeah. It's like, that's magic. He was, I think it was the Glenn Campbell Good Time Hour, where it was he and Ray Charles ended up doing something together. It's on YouTube somewhere. It's great, and he told me, actually, I remember him telling me this story. He had an above ground swimming pool, and he was kind of swimming around in this pool, and And he's like, well, Ray Charles told me, it's like, it's really important to be comfortable on the road. So you want to be there. So, he had his bus fixed up just the way he liked it, and so he took that to heart, so he stayed comfortable on the road and made it a pleasant experience for him, Yeah. Ate well, always ate, went out to nice French restaurants and, loved good food. And so he just, it was like his little chrysalis, just traveling around in this little bubble, living the John life.
Would he be recognized when he'd be out and about?
Yeah, somewhat.
It's an interesting level of entertainer where it seems like you could have your privacy, but still play to good-sized crowds. And
well, one of his favorite phrases was his grandson Dustin was explaining to one of his friends that came over who he was. He's like, well, he's really famous if you know who he is. And I think that's a perfect way of saying it because, the general, he's not Justin Bieber, but it's like, if you know, you know. And he's kind of turned into like a mythical figure now, which is interesting. And I kind of watched it happen. I went up to that Hartford Fest and like you see these like cartoon heads places. And he's kind of become not a caricature because that's a little negative, but it's just like a looming figure of what that all represents. But he did get recognized sometimes for the wrong reasons in public, or at least noticed. He was obviously eccentric, but he was not. He was on some kind of medicine that made his nose run, or something. He was really sick the whole time I knew him. He had non-Hodgkin's lymphoma that came back, and he was always that was always sort of an underlying current of what was happening. But so went into this fancy French restaurant, and he had Kleenex rolled up and stuffed into both nostrils. So, you can imagine, John looks weird from the giddy up, but you watch this like scraggly hair, a derby hat, 4 vests, and, then with all this, so called him Captain Kleenex. Yeah, just that. But yeah. So he always stood out. Like, even if you didn't know who he was, he's somebody. You know how that aura, when you see somebody, you're like, I don't know who that is, but that's somebody. It's an aura thing. Yeah, Bill obviously was a huge hero of his, and so he would go up to his farm, and he said one time they were going to go out fox hunting, and so Bill stoked up a fire out there, and they were sitting at the fire, listening for the foxes, and waiting to go hunt. I'm not sure how you fox hunt, but there's a story. So they're sitting around the fire, and they didn't really hear much. And so Bill turned to John. He's like, I believe we could hear the foxes just as well down at the Waffle House. Let's. John was like, all right, let's go to.
That's my kind of hunting.
Yeah, right? Yeah, let's get some country ham with that. But I'd never met Bill. He died in 95. I moved to Nashville in 97. So I was, really curious about him, and what kind of person he was. And and John just idolized him, big time. It's like he was a huge hero. And, of course, John being the fiddle junkie that he was, Monroe's band was so fiddle driven that, he was. And of course, that's the first thing, when John heard, Bill Monroe and Flatt and Scruggs back in the day, that's just, first time he heard that Earl Scruggs banjo, he said it's like lightning shooting through the speaker at him, and it just totally rewired his DNA or something, to change him. So, he held all these people in such esteem and respect,
Were they welcoming of him and his generation of players? We were talking about John had a different look and all of that. How welcoming was Bill Monroe towards him?
Seemingly very, I think John did, we went up to this restaurant up in Goodlettsville called Mason's Restaurant up on Dickerson. Mason's Motel, and then it had a restaurant attached to it. And so Bill liked to go up there because it was close to his house. And so he'd invite John to go. And so John and I went to that restaurant, of course. And John, he told me, he's like, first time I came in here with that, they came in the front door. And Bill Monroe, said, everyone, this is John Hartford, star of stage and screen. Just made this big. John was like, oh, shoot, Yeah. Yeah, so no, Bill really liked him, and there is kind of a funny thing of online. I forget where it is, but it's Bill trying to show John a tune, and John wasn't quite getting it, and Bill tried to show him a little bit more, and then after a while, Bill just kind of went. Just looked off in that Bill Monroe way, and it was just kind of like, we're not doing this anymore,
His patience was done with it.
Yeah, so he just kind of looked off way over yonder, and if you know Bill, and I guess that was kind of the sign, Yeah.
Who else was he influenced by of the earlier folks?
Scruggs and Benny Martin. Yeah, I mean those were the twin towers for John. I mean he absolutely idolized Benny Martin because he saw them as a kid in around St. Louis in '53 with Flatt and Scruggs and Benny Martin, and they all came off with the ties, and I mean that was my favorite Flatt and Scruggs band, 53, 54 with Benny in there. I mean it's an unbelievable, and Benny was just a sheer force of nature on that fiddle. I mean just pulling every bit of soul you could out of every single note. Everything Benny ever did was just imbued with every bit of heart that he had. I mean, it's a lot. I mean, it's not too much, but it's just like, oh my God, it's just, whoa, I mean, just tear your guts out, man. And John just absolutely idolized Benny's fiddling and, his songwriting. Benny was an awesome singer and songwriter and, and a true eccentric. But John really helped Benny make that record in the 70s called the Tennessee Jubilee. After he got sober, they made it's a great record. It's like John and Buddy Emmons and Roy Heskey Jr. and then like Lester Flatt's on it and Sam Bush. I mean, it's just so good. So John helped him make that record, and then he brought him out on the road with him some, but Benny was really, in fact, one of the bus drivers. He told me, he's like, if you're going to keep bringing him out on the road with him, I'm going to quit.
What would be the?
Well, I don't exactly know what, but I mean, Benny was just eccentric, and like very. I mean, I don't know what the clinical diagnosis would be, but it was something, he had a lot of. He was kind of paranoid. He kind of thought like the mafia was after him, and because he told me that he was working in Little Italy with Don Reno. They did this 5 and 5 or 8 and 5, 8-string fiddle and 5-string banjo. They did a record together, and so he was playing in Little Italy, and he said all these gangsters started coming to their shows, and they started liking him, So Benny started kind of kicking it with these gangsters, and so one of them said, "Hey, Benny, you got a piece?" He's like, "Yeah." He's like, "You want to make a little money?" He's like, "Yeah, okay." He said, "Well, we need you to show up someplace and drive somebody." He's like, "Okay." So Benny, he's like, "So I showed up and there's a gold Cadillac." He had vocal dysphonia at the end, and so he talked like this. Very hard to understand, but so. Well, by the way, Benny says he drove this, who was a mafia boss, like a New York mafia boss, around in this gold Cadillac for a little bit. Does that happen? Yeah, maybe. Yeah, maybe. I mean, I don't know. But that's what he told me. So that's, I'll take that. It was funny. Like Benny, in his older years, he didn't get out a lot. You know, he stayed at his apartment up there in Madison or around DuPont Road. And so he had his easy chair there, and then written on the wall was everybody's phone number that he liked, you know. And so he'd go around, he'd make his phone calls to everybody, you know, and just circle around, you know. It'd be like he'd call, of course, John often, and then he got to where he's calling me and Chris Sharp, Larry Perkins, you know. And so he had all these folks at Laura Weber probably, and so I was over at John's, and Benny was in particularly bad voice. He had it on speakerphone, and so over the speakerphone it sounded like, and John could generally make out what he was saying, and but this time he couldn't. He's like, Benny, can you sing it? And Benny went, well, I'm going to go over to the doctor later. So, you know.
So he could sing clearer than he could speak.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Actually, there's a funny story about Benny. He was over at Larry Perkins' house, which was in that Madison, Tennessee song. There's called A Little White House, Raised in the Roof of a Little White House in Madison, Tennessee. That was Earl Scruggs' little place that Larry Perkins lived in. It's on, just back there in Madison. And so everyone would show up there after the Opry, you know, the Osborne brothers, Grandpa Jones, Scruggs, Benny, Vassar, you know, you name it, people would go over there and hang out and pick. And so a few of the bluegrassers were going to go to a gentleman's club. And it's just like, Benny, we're gonna go out. You want to come with us? And Benny's like, I don't drink. I can go. I don't drink. You know, and it's just like, you want to, come on, man, come on. No, I can't go, I don't drink. He's like, oh, there can be some girls there. And he went, really? Yeah, he'd get cleared up right then. I asked him about, is into Townes Van Zandt, obviously, you know. And so I asked John if he'd ever hung out with Townes. And I guess he did, you know, Townes had come over and apparently was in, you know, real bad shape and, you know, not in a very good way. So that was all he kind of had to say. But I mean, but his orbit like went around everybody. I mean, there's bluegrass, you know, all the country stars and, you know, Hollywood people, you know, because he had a whole Hollywood era. So
who were his Hollywood friends?
Well, Steve Martin, like they used to be writers together on the Smothers Brothers show, you know, back before Steve Martin was Steve Martin, you know, so they were just writers. Like Super Dave Osborne.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Was he a writer also before?
I'm not sure what his tie-in was there, but
I only know of him as the Super Dave show that was on HBO or Cinemax or something.
But then he was on Curb Your Enthusiasm, that's a big character on that.
Wow.
Yeah. But I mean, everyone knew John, you know, he was just, you know, kind of a large figure, you know.
Yeah.
He took me up to the Long Hollow Jamboree where Bill Monroe used to hang out. And so it was like an open stage jam session. So like one of the first things we ended up doing, me, John, and Vassar Clements doing triple fiddles and up there, you know, just to throw together thing. But it was really, you know, I was just a kid, you know, 20 something. I mean, it's just like, it really kind of blew my mind, you know, just to orbit around these cats, you know, because I mean, I was super green, you know, it's like the
learning curve had to have been crazy.
Yeah. I mean, I was playing a lot of catch up, you know, it's just trying to get up with everybody and, you know, and just work like, you know, and John was like that too. He's like, I got to work like a Trojan just so I can keep up with, you know, young kids like you know. So it's like, that's the inspiring thing. One of the things I took from John is just like, you never stop being interested. You know, it's like always have something that has your passion and attention. And, you know, and if it's not this, then it's got to, you know, it's something. You just follow the river, so to speak, of what's got your attention and your passion, you know, and just watching somebody do that, it's like a lesson, you know, it kind of gets into your bones of like, okay, that's how you do that. You know, it's not like he told me about it, but just, you know, learn by example of how he lived.
When you were playing with him early on, was he particular about, no, you need to do this that way?
No, not at all.
Really?
Not at all. You were welcome to do anything you wanted. Like you could play, or if you walked off stage and left for a couple songs, it's like it wouldn't faze him. It's like John, you know, I wasn't, like I was in the band when John's, I'd fill in sometimes for Compton when he couldn't make it. I'd play a little mandolin. But then when John's hands went out, I started playing the fiddle. He couldn't play the fiddle anymore, and that was crushing for him, you know. So it's like, but I went out and helped him that way, and he was appreciative of it. But when he was, you know, like you know, he was a solo act, and so when he started hiring people along to come with him, his basic thing was just like, you know, I've got a good show going here, so just try not to fuck it up, you know. It's like, just
Yeah.
that. I mean, yeah, okay, that's the main thing. Just no, he wasn't like, you know, like Bill Monroe or Jimmy Martin that had a definite, like, you know, thing that you had to do. He was much more just free spirited, I think, and accepting of letting people be themselves, you know,
Yeah.
and supporting people being themselves, and supporting people finding their own voice, and not just be like, do something to be my guy. You know, it's just like he ultimately wanted everyone in his band to be their own guys, you know, and stand as their own individual, like, artist thing. You know, he was so supportive of that.
Like maybe even move on to their own project. Or...
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, he out loud said to he said it to Chris Sharp. He's just like, you know, after you're done playing with me, it's like, I want to make it so you can't work with anybody else, you know?
Yeah.
So, you know, and that was a good thing. Like, you know, be an artist, you know, do your own thing, you know, find your own voice. The last run we did was Asheville, and then we went to Dripping Springs, Texas to play. And John really had no business being on the road. I mean, he was incredibly ill. Actually, Asheville was like maybe a week or 2 weeks before the last gig in Dripping Springs. But, you know, we went to Asheville, and I had asked John, I was interested about how he used to lead those square dances around, you know, how he'd get the whole crowd dancing. And he was, you know, he was very sick. But then at the show, you know, he explained it to me backstage, and then at the show he did it and like led the crowd in the square dance, you know, and I just thought that was so sweet because he never did that, but he wanted me to see it, you know, so he just speaks to his, you know, kind nature and wanting to show it. But yeah, so then, you know, he was going downhill big time. And so we went to Dripping Springs, Texas, which was a long haul. And, you know, we had a bus driver with us. His name was Lynn, and he showed up. He'd never worked with us before, but it being such a long haul, we needed another bus driver. And he come from this Southern gospel background, so he had this like beautiful coif of hair, and just he was all perky, you know, at the beginning of it. And you know, if you fast forward to the end of the trip and see him, his hair was just all. It's like we wore this poor guy out, you know, dealing with John, but. You know, we got down to Dripping Springs, Texas, and I mean, John could barely hold his head up. I mean, he was so sick. I mean, you know, I've heard recordings of it. It's I dreamt to win away on the steam-powered aeroplane. You know, but people knew it, and like, it was interesting, you know, John really liked Chris Thiele, and so Thiele and his band at the time, Nickel Creek, they came up and sat in with us and just kind of help to support it. And I mean, I think John he never said this, but I think he had maybe a romantic notion of dying out on the road, you know, and he about did it. But I think he knew it was maybe the last go. And so after the show, we stayed there and had a big party in his bus. Like Tim O'Brien was there, Jim Lauderdale, and like everyone was just hanging out on the bus. And there was some, his hands, there's some friend, giving him massages, and he was laying in the back bed, just, helping him out. But everybody was hanging out, they wanted to be, and he wanted to be there, and it's like, we didn't hit the road right after, it's like, so we stayed and kind of had this last party on the bus.
It's the power of this community.
Yeah. Yeah. And obviously it's like we had a picture made, I think, for Rolling Stone or something. And they couldn't even use it because John couldn't hold up his head. It's like he was, yeah, it was, yeah. So we literally drove the bus from Texas to Centennial Hospital and dropped him off at the hospital. Yeah. And so it's where he was in the hospital for, a few days, but then ultimately ended up back at the house there on the river. And they got him a hospital bed and set it up there in the front room. And there was like a parade of, it was everybody that loved John and knew John in the Nashville community and abroad. And it was a nonstop cavalcade of people coming to support him and to play music for him and to keep his spirits up. And it was the most beautiful outpouring of affection I've ever seen for somebody, everyone knowing he's going out, and like everyone got to have this time with him. And John was, some people go softly into the night. John, he wanted to stay, it's like he wanted to be here. He wanted to pick, it's like it drove him nuts that his hands didn't work. It's cruel, it's a cruel thing. And, but it was amazing. You name it, literally, it's like they were there. They came, actually Super Dave Osborne came through, like David Allan Coe showed up. It's like, every bluegrass picker, Cowboy Jack, Scruggs family, anyone that was still alive and loved John came through and played for him. Bruce Molsky came and played old time fiddle for him, and just everyone. It was an unbelievable outpouring of affection, for this guy. And, and it kind of stayed that way until he passed away, and kind of continued. Actually, there's always food out and everything. And somebody brought some weed brownies, and nobody, like Marie, his wife, or Sherry, her daughter, who helped around the house, put the brownies out, there for John so he could, eat the brownies. But somehow, so they're just put out on the table. And so I had a brownie, and George Gruen had a brownie. And I had to go play the Opry that night. So I ate the brownie, and I was just like, and after a while, I was just like, whoa. What's going on over here? So it's just like, so I was high as hell, and I had to go play the Grand Ole Opry, tripping on this weed brownie, and then George, he's not a weed guy, but he's, you can imagine. I got very high from this marijuana brownie. Trying to conduct business while high on marijuana is not advisable. I remember, prior to his funeral, in the Southern Way, they had John's coffin brought into the house, for 2 or 3 days or something like that, And so I was there when they wheeled him in, and Marie opened up the casket to look, and John had on a Batman cape. And Marie was like, what the fuck is this? You know, she had a way with words, you know. She's like, well, she had taken his suit of clothes like prior to like to the cleaners, you know. And she put her grandson Dustin's Batman cape over it, so nobody, you know, so he wouldn't like see what was going on, you know. So that's just how it ended up at the funeral home with this Batman cape on it. So he shows up, and so she took it and then kind of tucked it under him, and so it's like, you know, John was buried in a Batman cape. So it's like how perfect is that, you know? But the funeral was at John's house up there on the river, and you know, everyone was there. You know, Tim O'Brien sang The Most Beautiful Gentle on My Mind, and you know, Gil and Dave, Scruggs, and you know, everyone was there. The General Jackson, I wore my General Jackson hat that belonged to John. He took it. He was a riverboat pilot, obviously, for anybody that doesn't know that. He was a licensed riverboat pilot. So he took the General Jackson on the dry dock trip down to New Orleans, or was it Jeff Boat? I forget, but I think it was New Orleans, and so they got this hat. I'm wearing that today. So the General Jackson came up the river and like gave a big salute to him, and John, I knew where all his stuff was, and he had a bunch of moonshine that was. It was called Cotton Eye Joe moonshine that he had kind of set aside. And story he told me was that this guy that made this moonshine lived in North Carolina and had been doing it for a while. And when Acuff and that bunch would run out of moonshine, they'd play Cotton Eye Joe over the radio. And so that was like the whistle to this guy to be like, oh, time to make a run to Nashville. And anytime you hear Cotton Eye Joe, so that he had written on the top Cotton Eye Joe moonshine. So his instructions were that everybody was to drink up all that moonshine, you know. So we all did, and yeah, I mean it was just an amazing time, you know. Obviously so sad and like, you know, tough, but I mean, what a life to live, you know, and what a testament to like the incredible influence he had on so many people, and how much love, you know, there came out of this community. And that's like, and that to me is like what makes this area of Nashville is like kind of singular, you know, in its communal vibe, especially in bluegrass. You know, anything that's bluegrass adjacent, I mean, it's like it's a crew, you know, it's like it's a family, and it really is that. And you know, and that was the epitome of that right there at his funeral and all, you know, prior to his passing.